started.
Awesome. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully most of you know Gemma Moses, founder of Moo Charity, co-founder of 5K Your Way, runner extraordinaire. I'm Lucy Gossage. I'm an oncologist. I'm dialing in live from Nottingham City Hospital, and we've got the most amazing roof terrace, so I'm sitting outside in the sun. And we're very excited to be joined by Luke Grenfell-Shaw, otherwise known as Bristol to Beijing on his social media channels. So Luke is partway through an epic bike adventure from Bristol to Beijing. He's right now back in Bristol for obvious reasons. So the focus of today is to talk a little bit about how we can turn challenges into opportunities. So when coronavirus became a thing, or I realized it became a thing, I had about a week where I was really scared. I was really anxious. I didn't know what the future was going to hold for any of us, for my patients, for the NHS, for the world as a whole. And I got quite low. And then I realized that are actually going to be quite a lot of positives that came out of it. And I decided that I would shift my thought processes around it and see it as a challenge. And when you see things as a challenge rather than as a nightmare, you can then turn them into an opportunity. So I met lots of amazing people in my time. People always say, who am I inspired most by? And actually, I think a lot of the time it's my patients, because every day at work, I see how people are thrown adversity, they're thrown obstacles, and the tenacity of the human spirit always, every single time, shines through. So Gemma is someone who I think has proven that we can turn challenges into big opportunities. So Gemma's going to talk about her background, but in a long story cut very short, Gemma had cancer, and that has, I'm sure, along lots of other stuff that she'll tell us about, but that has led to Moo Charity, which is why we're here today. Luke Grenfell-Shaw has also had cancer, and he's turned that diagnosis or that challenge into loads of different potentials that are evolving depending on what life throws at him, and he's going to talk about that today. But really, high five Luke, high five Gemma. So we haven't got a plan for this. This is going to be a little bit of a vague chat and exploration. We're going to see where we end up. But I can absolutely promise that if you listen to the end and you get to know Gemma and Luke a bit, you will come away empowered. You might come away a bit intimidated because they're both overachievers, but in a good way. But you might come out with some positivity and some ways to turn what's going on now from a challenge, because it is a challenge. It's pretty tough for everybody, particularly people with cancer on treatment, into an opportunity. So just to get us started, Gemma and Luke, one good thing that you did over Easter. Luke first. Or
my Easter was eventful. Ended up in a hospital, and then the
one good thing.
And then my wallet is stolen. But one good thing was that I sat outside in the sunshine and read quite a lot of my book on Saturday, which, I do all this running and getting about, but actually that was one really good thing for me to do really this weekend. So.
And Luke?
I went out for a nice bike ride. And what made it really nice was going on some new roads. It's been a bit of a challenge for me, like coming back to Bristol, and I've tried to kind of break my old habits and routines that I'm sick to death of, which would mean doing like the same sort of 21-mile loop. So it's been my challenge sort of each bike ride to go on some new roads. And it was one of those times when it really felt worth it, because I was sort of just transported onto some lovely country lanes, and that was really satisfying.
So the reason I ask that is because one of my strategies that I'm using at the moment is, no matter how bad things seem, and 6 days out of 7, life's great. Every now and then I get a little bump. I always try and think of something positive.
And so I was just going to say on that, Lucy, as well. Like, I think so throughout the last, say, 10 years, that it's kind of a gratitude diary way of thinking, isn't it? It's like focusing on positives that you've done or experienced that day. And I actually thought that was quite a fluffy thing to do, to sit down and go, okay, sit down outside in the garden, listening to the birds. That's a nice positive. But the more you do that, the more it becomes a habit and a routine, and the more it becomes ingrained in your life that you are able to sit back and appreciate, even if you can't do all of these things that you want to do, you can also start to appreciate those smaller things. So like you said, it's a strategy you use, but it's not that easy to put into place. But the more you do it, the more like you appreciate things in life that aren't necessarily huge things that, like, for example, now we can't actually go and do really. So definitely, yeah, one technique that people can use.
And I guess we're all forced to some extent to press pause at the moment. I guess a cancer diagnosis for lots of people forces a press pause, and coronavirus has forced this press pause. And because we've got more time, it's quite a good opportunity to incorporate changes in the way you think into your life, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think this is what I was saying. I was on a run with my husband the other day, and I was saying to him, so take away people who haven't got cancer. So in like, if you've not had a cancer diagnosis and you've not been through that, the reality of having cancer is that I certainly have been through this period of mental stress, and you know, in terms of having a diagnosis, your life gets turned upside down, and basically that's what's happening now to a lot of people, but without the cancer diagnosis, which is a life-threatening illness. And so a lot of people are experiencing a small part of what people with cancer experience. But the reality is, like, now, like, I'm 7 years post-diagnosis, and I go home and actually realize the reality is it isn't that bad, because I'm able to be at home in a nice house, my health is fine, and I'm able to get out for my exercise each day. But when you're diagnosed with cancer, it's like you have so much uncertainty. You don't know what's going to happen to your health. You don't know the end outcome. You don't know what's going to happen. So if you're in a job or at school, like, that automatically gets stopped without you even being able to control anything. And I think people are having a small amount of what we've potentially been through, but hopefully not on that level. So it's quite an interesting way to look at things. And I think that's why when this thing happened, COVID-19 happened initially, I was like, actually, no, I know I'm going to be okay, because I've been through a hell of a lot worse. So it gives you that perspective actually that you need at this period of time.
Luke, do you want to, so most people know Gemma's story. Gemma, I don't know if you just want to for those of you who don't know, just tell people who are listening a little bit of background, and then I'm going to ask Luke the same question.
Okay, yeah. So for those of you who don't know, I was diagnosed with stage 3 Burkitt's lymphoma, so a rare form of cancer, in 2012. And I was a fit and healthy, active runner before I was diagnosed. And I found a lump in my neck, and that developed into my abdomen bowel. So I had 13 centimeter tumours in my abdomen and bowel. So my cancer, because the type of cancer it is, progresses very quickly around the body, which is why within pretty much 2 months it was pretty everywhere other than my spinal cord. So I basically got my diagnosis, and 3 days later had to go straight into hospital. And that was where I was put in I didn't go for a bone marrow transplant, but I was put in a bone marrow transplant unit because I had to be in isolation for 5 weeks because of the nature and the aggressiveness of my treatment. And so my treatment lasted around 6 months, and it was a not COVID-19, Codox-M. It's too much likelihood. It's on the brain. Codox-M, which is a type of treatment. And yeah, I spent quite a lot of time, most of my time in hospital, but luckily got into remission after that 6 months. And I think for me, there was some things during my treatment that I guess I did similar to Luke, set myself a challenge, and I ran the Great North Run while having cancer, but also in between treatment cycles. And I think that journey really helped me to understand why exercise and physical activity was so important for me, both physically and mentally. So that's kind of my journey. And I guess then I went on to set up Move Charity based on the experience that I had with cancer diagnosis, but also the fact that I felt that people didn't get the right support around exercise and cancer. And I felt that it was vital for people to understand how the power of physical activity and exercise and the benefits it has when going through cancer treatment and also in recovery. So I think that
that is a short version of my journey. But we'll deep dive more into it. But basically that's where, and I was 24 years old at the time, so very young, fit and healthy before I was diagnosed with cancer. So as you can imagine, it was quite a shock to have that diagnosis as well.
So I'd love to delve into that a little bit. I think we need to find out a little bit about Luke. And I think all of us here should be very grateful that Gemma did have that diagnosis, because without that, we wouldn't be where we are now. Certainly, Move Charity wouldn't exist, would it?
No.
So Luke, tell us a little bit about you. So actually, I'll just put a bit of in context. So I heard about Luke through a friend of a friend of a friend, because Luke had a brother who was in Cambridge, and my initial reaction when I heard Luke's story was, oh my God, that's awful. And then Luke got in contact through a friend of a friend, and we had a chat, and I put down a phone, and I just had this overwhelming positivity. And I phoned Gemma. I was like, Gemma, you've got to speak to this person, Luke. He's amazing. So Luke, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so you know, like yourself, Lucy, like Gemma, I've been very fortunate to kind of grow up in quite an active, sporty lifestyle. I love traveling, and after I finished my undergraduate, I thought it would be an adventure to go out to Russia and teach English there and work on my Russian. And so that's what I did. I was out in Siberia for several months, and you know, at this point, I was, you know, in my peak physical health. I was, 24 years old. I did an ultra marathon, which completely ruined me, but I managed to run it. And I had some sort of ache in my left shoulder, and like any good athlete, I ignored it. This might sound familiar to a number of you. Any niggles that you have, you naturally want to keep on training, and you ignore them. And I did that very successfully for months, actually. After a while, though, it really got to the point I was like, well, something seems wrong with my left shoulder. I should talk, I should talk to someone about it. So I went to the school nurse, and I was like, and she was like, okay, take your top off, and I was like, of course. I turned around, there was a pause, and then she said, like, Боже мой, which means like, oh my God, in Russian. And that was the first time I realized something was probably wrong. And it probably wasn't just a little bit wrong, but it was really wrong. And 48 hours later, I was back in the UK in Bristol, Southmead Hospital, with a biopsy needle sticking into my back. And then 3 weeks later, I went back into the hospital, and the doctor told me, Luke, you have cancer. And it's not just cancer, it's stage 4 cancer. So the primary tumor had spread to my lungs. It was very aggressive, it was very rare, very advanced. And the prognosis looked pretty bad. I wasn't really expecting to see Christmas. I'm not sure many people were. And then had chemo, surgery, radiotherapy. I think that the works. There were some pretty dark days in there. It was like, 24 years old, right? And suddenly, Gemma, I'm sure you can relate to this, everything that you'd expected that to happen, that was your right almost in your life, that you would get married, that you would, climb a career ladder, that you would have a family, all these things that we grew up expecting will happen to us. It feels like it's taken away. And so coming to terms with that is horribly difficult. But my dad, that afternoon, I went for a run with him. He dragged me out. I wasn't really feeling it. And he said, Luke, the fact that you might die in 2 months is awful. It is devastating. But actually, there's nothing we can do about that. But what we can do, or what you can do, is choose how you live today and tomorrow. And if you're going to die in 2 months, and surely that means that you want to make the most of the next 60 days, right? That time becomes even more precious. And so that's kind of been an attitude that I've tried to take into my life since then, of trying to take control, I suppose, of the things that I can and maximize each day. And And I'd probably say I've kind of failed every day as well. I've never had a day when I've been like, I nailed it. Like I absolutely nailed it. But it's the attitude, I think, that's most important. That's a starter for 10.
Well, it's a pretty a pretty mind-blowing starter. And I think, gosh, so loss of control, I guess that's probably one of the things that scares me as someone who's never had a life-threatening diagnosis, touch wood. You alluded on it briefly. I guess perhaps a lot of people now, whether they've got a diagnosis or are just trying to survive through COVID, are probably experiencing a similar overwhelming lack of control at times. So how did you, and it sounds very simple, doesn't it? You go on a run with your dad says you can choose how you live your life, and off you go and do it. Easy. It's not easy, is it? How did you start putting that into practice?
Well, I should probably say, I went home after that run, and I think I probably just spent the rest of the day like pretty upset and moping to myself on the couch, sort of reading an escapist book, Shantaram, which I would highly recommend.
Oh, best book. I was going to ask you, best book ever. It's my best book ever.
Oh, really? Oh, I've got another one, but it's a great book. But, I think my attitude came down to because it looked so bleak for me, I wanted to do absolutely everything that I could to give myself the best possible chance of still being here in like 6 months' time or a year's time. And I think that's where a lot of it came down from, that and coupled with doing things that I knew I loved anyway. Because I love being active, I love being outdoors and running. And if I wasn't doing the things that I would enjoy, then I was kind of missing out even more, I suppose. Because if you're then depriving yourself of the, things that you even if that's, just reading a book or chilling with friends, like if you then say, fuck the world, like we're not on the BBC, so I hope that's allowed. But,
it's allowed.
Then you're losing out on the world. And I think the most important thing, if you have not much time, which you can't control, is to make the most of it. But it is a mindset.
What do you do on the days, I'm imagining, when you wake up and you just think this is so unfair, or you're so, I mean, you were cycling, you set up this amazing trip from Bristol to Beijing. You were raising huge amounts of money for charity, including 5K Your Way and Move charity. You were doing it on a tandem. You were encouraging other people who've had cancer or have got cancer or been affected by cancer to join you. And then coronavirus comes on and presses pause for who knows how long. And there must have been tough times. How do you deal with the bad days?
So actually that itself, you're finding out that you're realizing I'd have to stop the trip or pause it. That wasn't difficult, actually. It was because maybe it's having been through, what I have, and a lot of other people I'm sure listening, like there's nothing I could do about that. So there's no point getting angry or annoyed or frustrated. And immediately for me, I was like, okay, so what can I do with this time? It's not like we get this time back, it's not like we get 3 months added on at a later point, say, oh, well, you didn't really get to live properly during this time. Here you go later. That's not how it works. And so although there's so much that we feel that we can't do right now, it doesn't help us. Like, it's a very selfish thing, ultimately, to do things that are going to make us happy, even if there are some things that we can't do, to do what we can do now, which is going to sort of, do things that are enjoyable. So I've tried to expand my skills in other ways, and use this time to learn how to do some video editing. I'm setting up a podcast. So I'm really trying to use this time as effectively as possible. And there are always, I think, going to be avenues for that. And with Bristol to Beijing, the team has set up Bristol to Beijing at home, which is all about trying to promote a can live attitude and a support group, if you like, which I really recommend anyone who's listening to this to check out, Bristol to Beijing at home. And it's all about saying, well, this week I want to do one thing that I wouldn't have done otherwise, which is a really positive thing, and it's going to make my life a little bit better this week. And that's something that, you know, I'm doing to turn a negative, which is the COVID situation, into a positive thing in my life. And it's been really cool to see what's come of that so far.
I guess that ties in quite nicely with the gratitude diary that you were talking about, Gem.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry. I was going to say, so you were working for Nike when you were diagnosed.
Yeah.
I didn't know you, obviously. I imagine you were high flying. You had had your England vest for running. You were with Lou, but not married, or married to him?
No, with him but not married. Yeah,
with him but not married to him. And then your life gets turned upside down. How did you deal with the tough patches through that?
I think so. I didn't actually have my England vest for running until after I finished my treatment with cancer, and that's the kind of thing around. I was a better runner after I had cancer.
Yeah.
and I put that down to a lot of different, like my mental perspective and how mentally cancer changed me. I think I probably went through the same journey as everybody else. Like I was, in terms of my diagnosis of cancer and struggling to accept it initially. And what happened with me, so I was working with Nike in a marketing role, and you know, your career, like Luke said, you expect your career to go up and up, and then that's when I found the lump in my neck. But my story is I found a lump in my neck after I fell off. Basically, when you go to a train station, you see the gap between the train and the platform, and it says "Mind the gap." So I actually fell straight down, coming back from London, fell straight down that gap and broke my ankle. So in the March 2012, I fractured my ankle in 2 places, so then had to have a pin in the ankle. And I actually went through 10 weeks on crutches. And for me at that time, that was the most devastating thing that had ever happened to me, because my running was going upwards. I just joined a new coach, Alex Haynes, is a good friend of mine, and my running was going this way. And then I'd just fallen off the train and shattered my ankle. And for me, I was like, this is the worst thing that could ever happen to me. Then I was aqua jogging and I found a lump in my neck. And then a couple of weeks later, I went to the GP and just said, oh, it just probably just like glands are up. And then she was like, oh, we're going to send you to an ear, nose and throat specialist. And I basically, I just thought it was, you know, I just thought it was something that was very small, minor. I didn't have a clue what cancer really was back then. Like if you say cancer, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't understand it. I didn't have any family or anything that had been diagnosed with it. So it was just a word that I knew, I knew was quite serious. But at that time, they actually misdiagnosed me. So I got misdiagnosed with a cyst in my neck. And I think that's why it developed so quickly. And I think, and then I was diagnosed with full Burkitt's lymphoma. But I think the first time I was sat in the doctor's office and they said, you know, you have cancer. And I just said, am I going to die? That was, my mum and dad were there, and it was such a hard situation. And I just said, am I going to die? And then the consultant basically said, I can't tell you that answer, but this is the treatment pathway you're going to start on, and you're going to start in 3 days. And I walked out of that doctors, and I really feel that the things that you learn in life come back to you sometimes at those hardest days. So the skills that you've developed, and I believe the skills that I developed through sport and exercise and that resilience came back to me after that moment, because I felt like I broke down in the doctor's office, and then suddenly everything just went into tunnel vision. And I decided, I was like, right, I need to be here. What can I do to start this process? And the only things that I could do was, I basically told myself, I sat there and I was like, you cannot physically change the past. So I cannot, as hard as I wanted to try, I can't change what just happened then. I can't change what I've been diagnosed with. I can't change what happened 2 days ago. I literally can't even change anything. So if I wanted to go back and look, okay, I said maybe had more symptoms and maybe should have recognized things, I can't do anything about that. So what is the point in living in the past? All I could change is that present and that future. And I think that every time I go through a difficult situation now, that's what I really, really believe in. And I sit there and I'm like, I want to change it. And I'm like, I can't change it, because that is the reality of it. And I think what I then end up doing, and like Luke says, it's not a smooth journey. So people think that, for example, we went on and did different challenges like the cycle ride to Beijing or the you know, the Great North Run that I did. And people think that you get out of bed, you're amazingly positive, you want to take on challenges every day, and that's just who you are. And it's not. Like Luke said, you go through, during my cancer treatment, I was in hospital a lot. I couldn't do anything for 5 weeks, for the first 5 weeks when I was in isolation. And you go to the lowest of low. And I didn't realize what that low was until I was there. And the things that helped to pick me up were the people around me, my family, Lewis, who's now my husband. And, you know, those are the sorts of things, having that tunnel vision, taking things from what I knew with running about getting knocked down again and again and again and again and keep on coming back. And I think now, so I love this quote that so she's a Boston Marathon winner, Desi Linden, and her quote is just keep showing up. And I just love that, because it's just keep showing up. Like, you don't have to show up with a smile on your face. You don't have to show up with jumping out of bed with positivity. But if you just keep showing up, you will find more about yourself and the people around you than you ever knew was possible. And I think that to me really resonates. And yes, that quote was later down the line, but I just think that people's realities and people's situations are incredibly different. Like, we are all individual, we are all different, we all handle things differently. But if you just keep showing up, you'll find a way.
How important do you think having a plan is? Because as an oncologist, one of the things that I find really difficult with patients is that we give them a plan or a rough plan, and then cancer throws something up and the plan changes. And personally, I would really struggle with that. I would like to know what the dates are, when I need to be in hospital, when I need to have my, and I'd really struggle with that ever evolving answer. And I think particularly now with coronavirus, and there are even more uncertainties. And I know a lot, you were talking about friends and families and patients who are on treatment are having to have that in hospital on their own. They're not allowed visitors. A lot of the charities are less able to offer the services. It's really, really hard at the moment for patients. And I'm interested to know how important plans were to both of you, and how you dealt with things going a bit differently to what you expected.
Yeah, I just touched quickly on that. I think during my treatment, actually, so I knew that everything was out of control, and the only one thing I could control at that time was physical activity, actually, and running.
Yeah.
So for me, for example, I was in hospital for 5 weeks, and the first thing that I did when I left hospital was go for a 30-minute run. So similar to Luke. What do you know, and what's your common, like, what do you know that you do in life and that you can do? And that's, try and go for a run, even if I had to walk. So I went and did that. So that was my form of control. What I actually didn't know, I didn't really know the plan, my chemotherapy plan or my treatment plan, actually. So I only knew the name of it afterwards. And so I was in hospital for quite long periods of time. So I know that I was going in for a 5-day stretch or a 5-week stretch or a 3-week stretch. And I knew the drugs, but I didn't actually know the full plan. And I was okay with that, because what I wanted to do was, it's a bit like having a coach in terms of having a consultant. I needed the headspace to deal with what I needed to deal with. And I just trusted my consultant. Sorry, it puts a lot of pressure on you guys, but I trusted you, even though I did ask the questions. And, I had a very good consultant who's now one of the trustees on our charity, but I trusted her to make the decisions that were right for me. And I needed the headspace just to look after myself. So I knew that I didn't need to know the full plan. The only thing that I did know was that some days when I had my chemotherapy, I knew that if they were half an hour late, I'd be ringing the nurses going, come on, bring over my chemotherapy, I need it now. But that's because I was in long stays in hospital. So I think, again, everybody's individual and everybody will deal with it very differently. But for me, I just knew I had to focus on what I could control. And the only things that I could control was keeping myself occupied, trying to move and keep myself healthy, because I knew that made me feel mentally and physically better. But I also knew there were days where I spent 2 weeks in bed and I didn't get out of bed once. So it's a bit similar to the situation now. You are going on this journey that each day looks very, very different when you're going through your treatment with cancer. So I guess, those are the ways that I took my control. So I don't know about you, Luke, if that was, similar or different.
No, that's really interesting. I think one of the things, I mean, you know, planning is so difficult. And you know, this has already been touched on, you know, just how amazing family and friends can be. And you know, one of the things I'm grateful to my family and friends in many ways, but one of the ways that was so amazing is that they were prepared to be incredibly flexible. And so if I said on Wednesday, can we all just like meet up this weekend, they did. And for people to drop their plans and prioritize me in that situation, that meant a huge amount. And it meant that, you know, because I didn't know how I was going to be feeling, you know, where I was going to be in 3 weeks time, it meant that things could still happen. So that for me was a really amazing way to be supported. I mean, just a small example of many different ways. I think the other thing I want to bring to this discussion is the idea, I guess, distractions, things that take you away from the focus of treatment. And that could be exercise, but it doesn't have to be at all. I look back now and realize when I was going through treatment, I was finishing writing up a chapter on quinoa, as it happens, which is a project I had going before I started. Before I even had
quinoa, the grain. The grain.
Yeah.
Okay, just clarifying.
How it resists like drought and salt and heat and stuff.
That's interesting. That's for another question. We don't need to go down
that avenue. But the point being that, you know, even in some, I mean, I think it's again sort of personal. What works for one person might not work for another. But for me to feel that I still had this, that was this other focus and priority, meant that one, I wasn't thinking about what I was going through quite as much. But I think the other thing which is really important is that it gives you an alternate identity to being a patient. And for me, that was one really powerful thing that exercise gave me, that so often when you go through hospital, you are prodded, you are poked with thermometers, you're wheeled, you're told to go to one room, you're another, you're an interesting specimen. You're very rarely a human being, as much as, you know, obviously everyone is being incredibly considerate, but, you know, it can be you become a patient, right? And I feel you lose a little bit of that human identity and almost realizing that you can still do stuff for yourself and you can still choose what to do. Because often you can feel quite passive in that situation. So, you know, exercise, I think was for me a really important way of saying, actually, I'm still, even though I'm in hospital, I'm going to go for an hour's walk. You know, I'm going to take it on my own terms. And certainly the year that followed, as I went through sort of the chemo, radiotherapy and surgery, doing a master's at that point was like the perfect thing. Not that it sort of just happened, but having another focus that is flexible enough that if you need to take time off, because that definitely happened, you can do that. But then you've got this other focus and you're not defined by the condition you're being treated for.
And I think, and that's such a good point, Luke. And I think, you know, absolutely incredible to be doing a master's and what you were doing, which is awesome. And I think that resonates with me actually, because when I ran the Great North Run, the only reason I ran the Great North Run was because to raise money. So it wasn't about the exercise at that point in time. It was about, so we were raised, the teenage and young adult unit hadn't been built at Leicester yet. So I was 24, so classed as a young adult and still being treated in an adult ward, which was quite petrifying actually, and quite scary when you're being treated on the same wards and kind of bed area as an 89-year-old, because you want to be tunnel vision and you're seeing that reality, which isn't always nice, depending on the circumstances. So for a young person, it was so important that those wards were built, and Leicester hadn't had that yet. So they had this our space appeal, needed to raise money for that ward. And I was cycling similar to Luke, like the way you're using activity, but we decided to do a light cycle into the hospital to get antibiotics when I was on in between treatment and I needed antibiotics. I tell you what, when you rock up with your cycling hat and the consultant says, "What the hell are you doing cycling in for your antibiotics?"
That's probably changing little by little.
It would, and it would have changed the lesson now actually, because I know the consultant there. So I think that, so cycling in and doing that. And I think for me, it was a case of, so Lewis actually suggested it. He said, he was cycling, we were cycling along, he said, Gemma, wouldn't it be amazing? You did the Great North Run while you've got cancer, you'll raise a hell of a lot of money. And I was like, okay, that's great, but I'm going through my treatment right now and I've got cancer and this is really difficult to even cycle lightly, let alone run a half marathon. So he kick-started actually, and everybody else around me. So I got messages from work. They were like, Gemma, you don't have to do this. Like, you don't have to prove anything to anybody. But the reality of it, the Great North Run, I was going to get round even if I walked it. Like I didn't really think about the Great North Run itself. What I thought about is I sat there every single day refreshing my fundraising page, because I just wanted, that was the focus. And that got me through those 3 months up until the Great North Run, and then the next 3 months, because I knew I'd done something other than going through my cancer journey, which sounds weird because when you go through your treatment, you want to get to the end of it, and that should be the achievement. But I knew that I'd achieved something else, which was raising 25,000 for the Children and Young People's Unit, which I was ever so proud of. But then also finishing the Great North Run in a time that, you know, is an hour and 15 like away from what I would usually run. So jogging and walking around that with my family, and that in my life is now my proudest ever achievement, because of the circumstances that you do it under. But it also shows that, so like I did it 5 years later, set up a fundraising page, and I raised £400. I was just a bit like, I was like, why? But it shows the impact of, like, you know, that journey that I was going through. It resonated with a lot of people, and I was able to do something else other than be a cancer patient.
So I guess I'm very mindful that you two are overachievers, and for most people going through cancer treatment is for you as well, obviously, but it's exhausting. It's a full-time job, and I guess I'm trying to word it. You and the half marathon, that's incredible, but actually tiny little goals that in normal life would seem very tiny, during cancer treatment can become incredibly powerful and incredibly satisfying. And I guess you're not advocating that people should sign up for a half marathon during their treatment. You're advocating find something, some kind of challenge, whether it's physical, so walking a mile, or one of the things people say about the 5K Your Ways is it's a positive thing that's not related to their treatment that they can aim for once a month. It might be learning to cook something. It might be learning to knit. It might be something completely different, but find something that's not your cancer to aim for during your treatment. I guess that's probably what we're trying to get, our message.
Yeah.
I'd say absolutely. And I think exercise does have I think exercise is a little bit different from, say, learning a new skill, or, you know, it might be, I don't know, knitting or coding or whatever it could be, in that it does have a really powerful impact on your mental state. You know, the endorphins are for real, like they help, and I think that can make a really big difference. And then also physically, it just makes your body that little bit more resilient to the treatment. And I'm not, you know, I don't think either Gemma or I or you would be saying, you know, you need to go out and do a long run, but whatever your base is, just do a little bit more than that, you know. And if that means walking up the stairs once a day, that is fantastic. That is fantastic.
And it's just about, so the evidence is getting stronger and stronger, that physical activity. And we're not talking about running, we're not talking about exercising, but moving and staying active during your treatment is really important. And I guess it's even more important now in the current climate of COVID. And it's something I try to talk to all my patients about. It's really hard because we're doing it all over the telephone, but a lot of people on treatment are being advised not to leave their houses, not to do much at all. They're very limited. And actually, even in this time, it's even more important that people do stay active. So some kind of movement every day. And there's good science that when you're feeling low, when you're feeling tired, actually a little bit of exercise is the best treatment in terms of improving how you feel, making you feel better, making you feel more positive and more energized. Gemma?
And I think I agree in terms of, like, you need to, and this is why we've called it Move Your Way through our current situation. But I think that we run, from a Move charity perspective, an online cancer rehab building foundations program for children and young people, which is now delivered by our wonderful Helen Murray, and I know she's on here. But, you know, we've shared some. Hi, Helen. And Luke does Helen's. Luke does the yoga classes, which I've failed to get up for yet. I'm joining you this week.
Everyone should join.
Yeah, they should actually. But basically, we've shared some of the case studies over the last few months and some recently this week. But we have young people that come onto that program who have never exercised before. And the journeys that you see them go on in terms of discovering what they can do, building their own confidence and self-esteem, because often around physical activity and exercise, people's past experiences of that through school and life often influence how they feel, the positive relationships they have with physical activity and exercise. And so we've seen people who have really negative associations with exercise actually bring it into their life in a gradual, progressive way, focusing on just normal functional movements to start off with, and then finding out what they enjoy and what they love. Because some people don't know what they like they don't know if they like to go for a walk, they don't know if they like to play a game or a sport, they need a bit of self-discovery first. But we've seen that really inactive people have had life-changing results based on the support that they're given with introducing exercise and movement into their lives. So it does show that you're right, you don't have to go and do an incredible task or like an incredible sport or an event, or go for a really long run, but just moving ends up building your tolerance and building your ability to do things, and then you can build on that. And I think that that's part of the process. People have to start from somewhere, but they must build up gradually, find out what they like and they do, what they can tolerate, and then that will build their confidence and self-esteem in that area as well. And I think that it's very, like you said, the evidence is now pretty clear that, you know, it's safer to be active during treatment than it isn't.
Absolutely.
And also in recovery, but also to recognise, like I fully recognise when I was going through treatment, there were times where I literally could not get out of bed. I couldn't, for 5 days, for 2 weeks, I couldn't move. And I think it's to recognise that you need to listen to your body and take those days. But when you feel like you can, try and go and do something, because you will feel better for it.
And I would just say, you know, it really doesn't have to be very much. You know, there are a lot of times when I felt really wiped out, but just, you know, and it's not always going to be possible, but just going for a walk. And I think often, this is my personal perspective, often I think the current climate in the NHS perhaps is to sort of say, do less rather than more. And I think often you can surprise yourself in not doing loads, but just doing a little bit more than actually you thought you might be able to do. And perhaps your consultant thought as well. And I think that would certainly be the case, you know, with me in Bristol, that, you know, actually there's, you know, a lot more was possible. And I think it's really exciting to see how that is changing right now, the medical advice.
It's really from oncologists kind of telling people that the best thing they could do is rest. We are definitely, as a profession, becoming more aware and becoming better at least bringing exercise and movement and activity up in consultations. We've got a long way to go as a profession, I think.
I think as well, Lucy, on that, I think it also does come down to those health professionals that tend to be more active themselves,
absolutely,
in their lives, and again have had positive experience with exercise, are more likely to talk about and understand it. And it's the same with the ones that aren't likely to talk about it and understand it because it's not incorporated into their own life. And I think that's what we're trying to encourage with 5K Your Way, Move Against Cancer groups, and us as an initiative as a whole, is for people when we're out of COVID-19, but for health professionals to come down to those groups and experience it for themselves. But I think as well, like we've done loads of blogs recently. Read the blogs if you're a health professional. Listen to what people with cancer are saying, because we're trying to have a voice for you guys to listen to say, yeah, maybe we can do a little bit more than you think we could have done. And actually how beneficial that's been for us physically and mentally. So I think there's definitely two sides of it there. Sorry. No, you go, 'cause I've just got a question for Luke. But
I was just going to say, if you are someone who has discovered exercise during or after your treatment, tell your oncologist or your cancer professional that it's helped you, because the more feedback we get, I mean, I'm bought into it. I was a professional triathlete. No one needs to convince me. But tell the people that are treating you, your specialist nurse or the person who's giving your chemotherapy, because the more people hear and understand, and it's so nice when we do get the healthcare professionals that are 5K Your Way groups, they go away and they get it.
And tell us about Professor, I know you don't have to mention his name, but what he went on to do after coming down for the first time, because I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, so Palam Patel, he's now he's the oncology head of service actually in Nottingham. He started. I think he started running because of 5K Your Way, and I'd been banging on about it for ages and trying to encourage people to come down. And he was one of the early kind of converts. And then he secretly signed up for a half marathon, ran the Nottingham half marathon. He then last year he did a triathlon, and he was hoping to do a half Ironman this year. So that's extreme. But I'm not going to say how old he is. I don't actually know, but he's an older man. He's lost a lot of weight. He's definitely happier, and it's really amazing seeing how just trying something, no matter what your age or your background, can really be life changing.
Well, I think that's the case as well. Like, he started with a 5K and probably a run walk initially. Like, he came down to the group, and like Luke said, that starts something that then you don't know what your end goal is. You don't know what that is when you first start. All you need to do initially is take that first step. To then,
I think it's also it's just worth saying how difficult that first step can be. I don't think it should be underestimated, because it can sound very trivial, but I think, like, even today, or even yesterday, in fact, it was not easy for me to get out the front door to go for a run. Like, I was just not in that mental state. And I think as soon as we take for granted that first step, then that's a problem. Like, it's always something we need to say, actually, you need to put a bit of energy in. You're not going to necessarily do it unless you force yourself or you're really conscious about doing it. But after you start doing it, you're going to feel a lot better, almost certainly. And I just think it's so important to say it's not that there's this like mental barrier of getting out the door, which certainly I find from time to time.
Yeah, I think that's also what we've experienced with our 5K Away group, how the social support and people who are going through it with you or there to support you can help you take that. So you know that you're going to meet somebody at a particular group, or even like now, people, that you're going to log on to yoga sessions with Adrian and Helen at that time in the morning. So you've committed to that, haven't you? And people will notice if you're not there. So like you say, it's looking at those skills and those tools that you can bring in to help you do that. And I think some of it, like along with the gratitude, is so I went to see an incredible physio a few years back, but he was saying about sticking things, and I've noticed this with a lot of elite athletes, is sticking motivational quotes on your bedroom door or your bathroom window, so that you can look at each morning to remind you, like, it's that positive affirmations. And they really work really well in terms of psychology perspective, because you're waking up and seeing that and going, I can do this. Okay, I can. So there's a number of different tools that you could potentially use as well. I think
it's interesting, and you brought it up that your lessons from sport they helped you deal with your cancer. And I'm not going through cancer treatment, but being an oncologist can be challenging, and I'm personally finding it even more challenging at the moment, because we're doing a lot of stuff over the phone. We're losing all the bits that make cancer treating patients manageable is suddenly gone, and people on treatment are having such a horrible time in general. And I'm definitely drawing on the skills I learned as a professional triathlete. And so I think it's really interesting how psychology from all walks of life can sports psychology can help any aspect of life, and normal psychology can help sports as well.
Well, I think
Luke's
on a knock-on effect of that, the skills that I learned, or the mental resilience that I learned through cancer treatment, has helped me deal with this COVID-19 situation. So I look back and I go, what I went through there, the perspective and what the tools I developed, I'm now using now. So you can take different things. If you sit and reflect enough and learn about your past experiences, you can take them into your present and your future, which I think is really, really important, to try and draw back from those experiences that you've been through.
Luke, I've got a question for you. How do you deal with uncertainty? Because I think you're still having regular scans. I guess you don't know what's going to happen with your trip. You've got a lot of uncertainty in your life. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. A really good question. You know, like I was surprised to see my 25th birthday. You know, I wasn't expecting to see that. I wasn't really sure if I was going to finish that master's. And for a long time, I wasn't sure if delaying the start of my ride to finish my master's to wait to the 1st of January was a really silly thing to do, because it might have meant that I wouldn't have started. And that's super tough. I don't think there's any way around that. I think, you know, there are different levels of planning in my head of like different time scales. So there's the sort of, what can I do? What do I want to do today that's going to make me feel like I've had a decent day living today? And, you know, and maybe that, you know, how does that feed into the next month? You know, so an example right now is I'm setting up a podcast, and that's probably my goal for the rest of this month. You know, I'm fairly certain I'll get to the end of April. You know, but beyond that, it becomes increasingly uncertain. I think to an extent, I've been hoping for the best, but not assuming it, I suppose, and knowing that there's a risk that it might have been, you know, it might have been a mistake, and it still might prove to be a mistake to have started this cycle ride later, because it means that perhaps I won't get to finish it. But I think there's just something you've got to be happy with in your own mind. You've got to be clear about the decision that you're making and why. And I think you just have to kind of accept the uncertainty as well, because you don't get away with it. I guess it's kind of being at peace with the uncontrollables. Perhaps that's a way of thinking about it. Yeah. And, you know, also there's not much you can do. So I don't think it's a good answer, though. It's a really good question.
I think that listening to the answer is so true, though, because I think a lot of people either will be in similar circumstances, Luke, or just going through COVID-19 as somebody with cancer. I think that, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty for everyone, that I haven't been through cancer treatment in COVID-19, and I would be, you know, there's a lot of worry and anxiety going on and uncertainty. And I think that answer just kind of sums it all up, doesn't it, really?
Well, I think there's another thing here, and that's yes, you can get lost in the uncertainty, you can get lost in the worry and the anxiety, and actually what's so important is you keep on living today, like, and it's in your control. Like, ultimately, what I'm really passionate about is saying to people is, in a sense, be selfish. Like, don't do this stuff for anyone else, because it's not for anyone else. If you want to live your best life, if you want to actually enjoy today, well, you're doing that for you ultimately, because then you're going to have the better day, because actually the other 7 billion people out in this world kind of don't care too much. Like, a few of them care quite a lot, but ultimately it's for you. And that's how I think about these things. And that's why I'm like, so what do I want to do now and tomorrow and next month?
But see, you say being selfish. Chris Evans, actually, I love Chris Evans' psychology, and he says if you kind to someone, you feel better. So Luke came to stay when he came to the Nottingham 5K your way, and within 5 minutes entering the house, he was chopping my vegetables. Within half an hour, he was building a table in the living room. So,
are you offering your services, Luke?
I would not say that.
I like to earn my keep. So.
Sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say we have got questions.
Okay, perfect. Go on then.
Should we go on to the questions? Yeah. So
I've got two things I want to ask. We're going to have to do all this up soon. Gosh, we're almost
I told you it'd be over 40 minutes. Lucy showed us her notes, and I was like, wow, we could go on for 2 hours.
I've got one question for both of you, but let's do these questions, and then I was going to say
maybe we need to do it on a podcast so we can go over an hour. So
did I mention that I was there?
I know. We'll be back soon, guys. So Helen actually asked Luke, so when you went on those walks or runs, I think when you said, like, when you went out with your dad, how did you feel physically? Was it the last thing you wanted to do, but equally the first thing you wanted to do?
Not quite. So a lot of this for me, I went for a walk because for me, during that point of the treatment, this was the sort of during when I was in hospital, I was in hospital for 3 or 4 days at a time. And then for another 3 or 4 days after that, all I could do was walk. And I know that's more than some people are able to. So I was very lucky to be able to walk. And after my first treatment, I tried to go for a cycle, not knowing kind of what chemotherapy does. I was like, I don't know, I'll try. It wasn't a great idea. It knocked me back a couple of days. I mean, I do feel I was lucky, to have a really supportive, mum and dad and girlfriend who like made these things a lot easier and, kind of remind me and help me, Luke, you'll feel better getting out the door. I can't honestly say it was like super enjoyable, right? Like it was, as people who've gone through chemotherapy, you feel washed out, you feel a bit rubbish. It's not like kind of the breeze and the scent and, hearing birds kind of makes you happy. But I knew it was probably like the most constructive, positive thing I was doing that day. And so for that reason, it was really important. And I guess it was my way of taking control of that situation, I knew that if I went for a walk, it would be sort of me doing everything I could to sort of get back active as soon as possible between my cycles and remain active, hopefully overall. It certainly wasn't the thing I was, jumping out of bed to do in the morning, but I think it's something I absolutely knew I wanted to do.
And I guess it's important to say for people who have done sport before, cancer treatment changes any normal parameters. And having seen a few friends who are sporty, it can be quite disheartening if you look at your speed or your power, and you have to take away any background of what you used to be able to do and just start from a new normal. And that normal will change day by day, it will change week by week, it will change month by month, it will go up and then it will go back down again. And I guess I imagine that's probably really hard to deal with as someone who has exercised quite a lot.
I think so much of this is about acceptance, and actually just being like, you know what, like, what I could run before means bugger all right now, totally different ball game.
I completely agree. So I had the same experience. I knew I was going to the Great North Run, and I planned myself out a 6-mile run. After a mile, I turned around and walked home. I was like, I'm not making that 6-mile run. And I literally did about 2 miles before I did the Great North Run. So I think you're right. Like, even people who have been really active and sport is their thing, you really do just have to accept that doing any form of movement is nice and it's kind of a luxury, but you will feel like crap, basically. I think going through any type of treatment for cancer, you don't feel good. Like you feel horrendous most of the time. There are times where you feel even worse, but during that treatment, you never really feel normal and like yourself in terms of physically and that feeling. So I think it's just like Luke says, accepting it and focusing on what you can do. And if that means you go out thinking that you're going to go for a bike ride or a walk that's longer than you think and then actually having to turn back, that's okay. That's just the reality for a lot of people.
So I think you've both answered my final question, perhaps, but if you take yourself back to just when you're about to walk into that room and be told that you've got cancer, what would you tell your former self at that point in time before you walk into that room?
Okay, I'll jump in. I think for me, I would say actually, Luke, there is hope, because it felt like a very, very hopeless situation. And I think the other thing, and actually this is part of my mentality that I haven't really spoken about, but in a lot of ways, it doesn't matter if the statistics for your whatever condition you have are, say, 80-20 or 90% 10%, and it doesn't matter what the statistics are. It's your job. This is the way I see it. It was my job to try and put myself in the right side of those percentages. And I suppose I would go back in and say, Luke, you know, it is worth giving it a shot. Like, you know, there's nothing certain in this life. And that means that none of us can take this life for granted, but it also means that we shouldn't take for granted that we're also going to get killed by cancer in the next 6 months. And it's something that you've got to put all your life into, to giving yourself the best possible chance for more life.
Yeah. So I guess for me, if you're looking at telling your, you know, your past self what you do differently, I actually don't think I would change what happened. So that's kind of two answers of being in the room, but then, so cancer has changed my life, and it's changed my life for the better. My perspective, the way I think, the way my life has gone. I think I've had so much more experience and love for life than perhaps I would have had. And I think for me, one thing that I definitely wouldn't change is that when I was going through my treatment, and it's a bit similar to the situation now. So my husband Lewis was brilliant in terms of, you know, when we talk about surrounding yourself with the right people and that positive attitude, and we were going through, you're giving a yellow thing that tells you all the side effects of your treatment. And you get given on the first day of treatment, you're given all these booklets that you're supposed to read through. And some of them are really positive, don't get me wrong, some of them are positive. But my side effects of treatment, basically, if I read them all, I may as well have just jumped off a cliff. That was the reality of it. Lewis has said, well, if you're going to read through these, you may as well jump off the cliff right now. And I think that, you know, and it's going on in the media. If you read everything in the media, you may as well not be here. Like, there's so much negativity, and it gives you anxieties of what could happen. And for us, I think the one thing I learned, I think I did quite well, was have that tunnel vision and focused on the process. But like Luke says, put yourself on the right side of the line. And the only way, because you don't know what's going to happen, the only way to do that is to think that you're on the right side of the line. And that is not being consumed with what could happen, but instead focusing on what that process and what you can do. And I think that's why I wouldn't actually change anything, because I think I needed the experiences I had when I was told I had cancer to then that's shaped who I am now. And I wouldn't go back and relive that again, because, well, I wouldn't change how I dealt with that, I don't think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'd just add to that.
Else?
Sorry. Yeah, go on, Luke.
I just want to add as well, because I think there'll be some people perhaps listening to this, and if you're lucky, then your cancer diagnosis makes your life better down the line. But that doesn't happen for everyone. And I think that's just so important to acknowledge that it's not always going to be rosy. And so if that doesn't feel like you, then that's actually also, that's fine. And I think it's where acceptance comes in, and it's where, like, just making the most of what you can do still is just as important. It makes it even more important. But I don't think it's like cancer, you know, having cancer diagnosis doesn't make everyone's life better. I think that's just in case there's maybe some people out there going, oh, it's all right for you two have, you know.
Yeah, and I think
I just want to temper that a bit.
No, and it's very, very true. And it's like, it, you know, it can change your life for the better, but then you can still have, like, people like I experienced post-traumatic stress from, well, like, what I feel was post-traumatic stress from a cancer journey, because flashbacks and anxieties and that sort of thing. So although things look rosy, there are also those underlying things that you have to deal with for the rest of your life. And like you said, there are, you know, I count myself very, very, very lucky now that I'm able to sit here and talk to you guys, because I also know a lot of friends and a lot of young people and a lot of other people that have had cancer that aren't here today. And that's not because anyone fought any harder, it's because of the situation we're in. So that's the reality of cancer. And I think that's why, you know, all of three of us are very, very passionate to help others in any way that we can, but also completely understand that people are going through different journeys and have different mindsets and have different ways of dealing with things. And we all recognize that, but we're just trying to provide our personal insight to help each person. So,
and just as a doctor who sees a lot of people with cancer, I think people always say to me, God, your job must be depressing. And actually it's not at all. It's so life affirming. And that's because no matter how bad something seems, no matter what someone's background, what their age, what their family, friends, support network, what their education, whatever they're told in clinic, they might have a massive dip, but every single patient finds a way to get through it. And I think the tenacity of the human spirit is something that I take away from my job. And I guess when I was reflecting, just going back to what I was saying about COVID and the challenge, and I think that leaves me with a lot of hope for the world. When we come out the other side of COVID, take cancer out of the equation, I think there are lots of people who are losing their jobs, who are worried about, everything from every single part of their lives. But I think there are so many positives in terms of we're stopping, we're appreciating the small things, we're doing what we talked about, what you guys had to do when you were told that you had cancer, reevaluating your lives, working at who's important to you and how you want to include more of them in your life. And I think those positives, turning this challenge of COVID, we as people who haven't had cancer can learn so much from people like you guys who have had cancer and have proven that humans do it every day of the week, every part of the world.
Yeah, and that's so true. And I think like we've had on our on the actual live feeds, I can see us guys twice now, but we've had some lovely, some lovely comments of people sharing their own, their own journeys and how when they remember back when they had their cancer diagnosis and how they've used, they've gone for walks, they've used exercise, they've gone to park runs, they've been 5K away group because they're doing it with other people, and everybody's got that slightly different story that they're sharing. And I think
so we should signpost people towards Luke's Facebook group, couldn't we, at that point?
And I think we'll all be joining in with that. But that's why I think that these communities are so important, like what you're doing, Luke, what we're trying to achieve with 5K away and Move charity. And I think all of us do have a different way of doing things, which is really good, because there's so many different people and they have different ways of doing things. So not all of us can provide for everybody. So I think that's why these groups are really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
so if you guys are interested, Bristol to Beijing at home, follow the Bristol to Beijing page, or hopefully there'll be a link up as well. But that's just really about supporting each other, doing something that we wouldn't otherwise be doing, which is going to make our lives better.
Brilliant. And in one of those, Luke, you can do so we're going to do the live workout again on our actual 5K Your Way, on our 5K Your Way day, which is the 26th of April, I think, Saturday. Is that, so we did it 2 weeks ago, because we're bringing it a bit regularly. But we can all do a workout together, and that can be one of your activities for the day.
I'm looking forward to it already.
Brill.
We should probably we've gone way over schedule, so we should probably tie this up. But I've absolutely loved talking to both of you guys. I've learnt loads.